Listener-supported St. Gabriel Catholic Radio AM 820 brings you Family Sanctuary, a show that inspires living the gospel message in word and deed within our families. And now, Family Sanctuary with host Peggy Hartshorn.
Welcome to the Family Sanctuary, focusing on life-giving relationships and the family. I'm your host, Peggy Hartshorn, chairman of Heartbeat International, that advances life-affirming pregnancy help around the world. And today we've got a really interesting program, I think, for you, and something that is, I'm sure, a very important topic in your family as we are discerning our own individual paths in life, as we are helping our children and grandchildren in this very important process. What does God want of us in our lives in this world, and particularly in thinking about our path in life in terms of our vocation and our job? What does God have in mind for us, and how do we discern that? And our guest today is David Lach. Welcome, David, to the program.
Thank you.
David is a professional counselor. He is a graduate of Franciscan University with a master's in clinical and mental health counseling, and he's recently settled in the state of Ohio. We're so pleased that that's true, and in our Diocese of Columbus. And he is now with Spirit of Peace Clinical Counseling. But he has a wonderful personal story. I'd like to start with that, David, in terms of your own, let me say, stumbling path, because that's true for most of us, isn't it?
Yeah.
How we kind of stumble sometimes in discerning in our path in life. We think, I think this is what I'm supposed to do. And we may even prepare for that in education. And then we get into a position, a job, and we think, that's not it. Uh-oh.
Right.
So let's start a little bit. I know we want to talk about some principles in discerning the path. How, what have you learned through your process that can help other people? But first, let's start with your personal story a little bit, if you wouldn't mind. Absolutely. You know, how did you start? If I recall, you were into some New Age thoughts at one point. So tell us about your story of discerning your path.
Yeah. So I am a convert to the faith, and so I was raised in the New Age movement. But as I discerned the truth and found the faith, I ended up, I was baptized about 13 years ago, and then actually just a few years after that, I decided to discern the priesthood, and with the Order of Preachers out in San Francisco, and I was there for 2 years.
And so that's, I mean, I'm thinking of coming from a New Age perspective, and then discovering the truth. God revealed that, gave you faith, and I mean, and I can understand certainly in the excitement of being a new Catholic and feeling so close to the Lord. Do you think that was what first led you to think a religious vocation is what God had in store for you?
Yeah, there was certainly, that was a part of it where I was very passionate about the faith, of course, and passionate about sharing it.
As our wonderful converts are.
Yes, absolutely. Beautiful. Yeah, and so that very quickly came to mind. Even before I officially became baptized, it was a thought in my mind. And also, too, kind of along this line of discerning our path, seeing what providentially came in my life during that time, right, where I did different forms of ministry, and I really enjoyed being of service to others and being kind of available to them when they're a time of need. And so that was something I observed during that time and saw how enriching and fulfilling it was, which gave me a thirst not just for spreading the faith and teaching it, but also being a kind of pastor, minister to others.
Sure. So your first, and a spoiler here, spoiler alert, you are not a priest now.
Right.
You're not a monk. You're not a brother.
Right.
So, but you started along that path, all right? And discerning, and of course that's so beautiful, and our religious orders and dioceses welcome young men to start along that path and discern whether that's what God is calling them to.
Yes. And, and it's hard to discern just hypothetically, right?
Sure.
I think, of course, there's time of prayer and reflection, but really the best way to discern is actually by trying things, right?
Take the first step.
Exactly.
Yes.
Whether it's a vocation weekend, just speaking to a priest, and then if God's leading to the next step, actually entering the novitiate, for example, or joining a year of seminary. Yeah.
So you entered the novitiate in the Dominican order.
Yep, that's right. Yep.
And out on the West Coast,
Yep.
right?
Yep. Yes.
Okay. So and you stayed in the novitiate for 2 years, is that correct?
So the novitiate is 1 year long, and then
Okay.
I took 1 year of simple vows and did seminary for 1 year. Yeah.
But what did you discover along that path? And how did you discern that this was not the path that God had in store for you?
Right. Yeah. I think one of the, I guess you call it the positive things, or things that really resonated with me, was kind of what I mentioned earlier, where just being available to others, helping them in whatever struggles they're going through, and wearing a habit is a really nice way to say, hey, I'm
here to help.
Yeah, I'm here to help you. And that was a really beautiful thing. I really enjoyed that. And even at the time, as I was going back and forth about discerning out, I remember thinking I would really miss that part of being a friar.
Sure.
I think there were a few things, though. I think on the most general sense, right, our vocation ought to help us grow, right? And our vocations are going to be challenging, right? But I realized that there was a point where I wasn't growing spiritually or on a personal development level anymore.
Okay.
And that was just becoming clearer and clearer to me. I'm kind of hitting a brick wall, right, in a sense. And so that really was probably the clearest thing for me in terms of discerning out.
So where did that lead you? What was how did you proceed once you realized that, a sense of discomfort, was you weren't growing, you weren't, you were just really feeling, and I guess this is what we mean by discernment, processing everything you were feeling and thinking and experiencing, that this was not the path that God had for you permanently.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely obviously brought it to prayer. I, as best as I could, patiently walked through that. It wasn't just like it happened one day and it's like, all right, now I'm gone. It was just seeing where that led, seeing the consistency there. Obviously speaking to people, not
You
just
sure had spiritual advisors.
Yes, absolutely. So, but also too, just really trusting God in that. Sometimes people give you different advice, which can be difficult, right?
Sure.
And I think the challenge for us as agents with free will is God sometimes wants us to make a free choice, right? Not just say, oh, my spiritual advisor said this. Of course, there's area for obedience, but sometimes they just give you advice and you have to decide, what am I going to do with that?
Sure,
right?
sure.
And so it took a while. I can be a little indecisive, so I know it's one of my qualities, but eventually.
Thorough in your processing.
You can say that. Yes. I was, yes, but I did have to make a choice, and it was difficult for sure, because it's definitely a lifestyle change, but I did ultimately feel a lot of peace about it.
So what did you proceed at that point? Did you go back to school?
No, not quite yet.
No.
Yeah. I mean, it was definitely some time of struggle and not being employed and really wanting to. But I think that was one area where God actually really blessed me, where he helped me to see that getting a career, I thought, once I get a job as a normal person, I'm going to be perfectly happy, right?
Yeah, right.
And God showed me it. I think, maybe through his providence, allowed me to be unemployed for a little while to see that wasn't my ultimate source of happiness. It would never be.
Your
right?
job.
My job, right? My ultimate source of happiness is God, and walking the path that God has for me in relationship with him.
Sure.
And so I eventually did end up finding a job. I actually, for a long time, I really thought I wanted to be a teacher. Like kind of that yearning for teaching the faith, or some kind of teacher in social studies, for example, would have been something I would have really enjoyed. And I very providentially got a temporary job at a high school with students who were struggling academically. And that job I had very providentially helped me to see I wasn't meant to be a teacher. I realized I didn't have the temperament for kind of leading a classroom. I love instructing, but being
more one-on-one.
Right. Exactly. But kind of the temperament it takes for managing a classroom. I realized I could do it, but it was exhausting beyond a way that was still life-giving. And so it was such a huge blessing that I got that job and didn't jump into getting my master's in teaching or getting a job at a high school, for example.
Yeah.
So that was very merciful of God in terms of how he was leading me through those concrete experiences.
Sure. And that's a very interesting point, that sometimes people are urged into a particular path. I can remember I was a professor at Franklin University for 20 years, and so many people, so many students had been really, what should I say, counseled into, talked into a particular academic degree because it was going to pay a good salary, or it was going to be very practical for them. And those are important. Those are important factors. But many people weren't suited for those areas. There was nothing about them that interested them to actually delve into, in a kind of a thorough preparation. And I think one of the things that you've mentioned to me is that you think it's very important to develop your skills, find out what your skills are. And by developing those skills, you can use the skills help develop your passion.
Absolutely, yes.
And then your skills and your passion are connected.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I actually, during this time, I sort of learned this important aspect of discernment from it was not a religious book, but a book I stumbled upon. And the premise of the book was, for your career, don't follow your passion, but follow what you're good at, and passion will follow. Right. Which
good.
it was kind of a funny book because it had all these anecdotes, people trying to follow their passion. And honestly, our passions aren't always practical, right? Sometimes they are, right? And certainly people get to have jobs that are aligned with their passions, right? But that's,
sometimes your passion, a particular passion, could end up being a hobby.
Right, absolutely.
Or something that you do in addition to your career, your job. Yeah.
And it might actually be more fulfilling as a hobby too, right?
Yeah,
and
good point.
And I realized at that time, I was helping with Bible studies and things like that, and I actually found a lot of fulfillment in that field. And also too, the idea with our vocation, we ought to be able to grow. And so it's like seeing, can I develop my skills here and find fulfillment in the very act of learning more and growing in whatever job I have and career I have.
So how did you finally end up realizing you wanted a credential in counseling?
Yes. Yeah. So I think reflecting back on my experiences with discerning the priesthood was one factor. A really big factor, though, was I ended up working in a job as an employment specialist, a developer, helping people find employment. And that was a really fulfilling job, but kind of what I did most of the time was basically acting like a salesman, where I went around seeing if businesses were hiring, advocating for clients, right? And obviously very much needed, but what I really enjoyed about the job was actually meeting with clients one-on-one and mentoring them on job skills and things like that, even sort of like good life skills. And I got really good feedback from the counselors I worked with my clients. And it was only like maybe 10% of my job I got to do. And I thought, man, I would love to just do that, just meet with clients. And I kind of I got from good feedback telling me I had a good knack for this, of helping people and meeting with them, meeting where they're at and mentoring them, walking with them in that path. And so I saw the fruitfulness there and how I was able to grow in that and find really joy in helping people in that way and in that setting. And in a way that wasn't draining the same way that teaching was, right? At a high school.
You were helping people, you were helping them grow,
right?
But it was more of a one-on-one coaching and guidance, listening to them, and then based on what they said, guiding and helping them develop.
Right. And this wasn't something that I had planned for, like, I'll be a job developer and then that will lead to me being a counselor. It's like, it just kind of, in a way, I mean, I obviously chose to work for them, but I did in a way stumble upon it. Providentially came up, and through that providence, I kind of discerned from where I was, saw how God was speaking to me, how he was helping me grow in that, and then seeing what makes sense for the next step forward, right? How can I further lean into where I see myself flourishing and serving others in that path?
Yeah. Well, in summarizing, we're about halfway through our program, and I want to reintroduce our guest, who is David Lach. He is now a counselor, professional counselor with Spirit of Peace Clinical Counseling here in the Columbus area. We're talking about how he discerned his path in life, how God led him into a career, into a job, his livelihood that uses his gifts and skills and is a passion, where your gifts and skills are connected to your passion, and he's following the direction of the Lord, service of the Lord and service of his brothers and sisters. So David, it's a beautiful story, and but in thinking about how sad it is that today often for our young people, I know when my daughter first became a freshman in college, I went with her to the first meeting where she was going to be discerning or not discerning, choosing her courses. And the first thing they wanted to know was what was her what major did she want to declare at age 17, and then they were going to lay out the courses for that major. And I'm thinking, college wasn't that way when I went. The first 2 years at least were your general liberal arts preparation. You took all kinds of different courses to even get exposed to different disciplines and intellectual paths and plus general history and and of course I went to a Catholic college, so we had theology and it was I thought a wonderful experience that helped me grow and discern what path God was calling me to. I was one of those people who when you said go with what you love in terms of your skills, see what your skills are, and then your passion will follow in that. And I loved language and English and literature, and I was very, very fortunate to be able to actually then get a credential in that and become a college English teacher for 20 years. So I had a somewhat of an easier discernment. And I was one of those people that could, at age 17 or 18, say, this is what I love and this is a skill I have that I want to develop. But that is pretty rare in this day and age. So I'm thinking, as we are talking about the importance, if someone's listening with your children, your grandchildren, in terms of giving them kind of practical experiences, let them develop perhaps in part-time jobs or in volunteer work or in practical ways, seeing where their skills are and what skills they want to develop.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I would say, because like mentioned earlier, right, it's very hard to discern hypothetically, right?
Yes.
I think there's a place for kind of there's some very good tests out there to help you see what would be a good fit for your career. But there's actually a career counseling theory out there I like called happenstance theory.
Happenstance
yes.
theory.
And what that theory says is that you don't decide your career from taking one test and then you got it down and you can just
this is where the numbers show I should go.
Exactly. Yeah. But really, if we think back on our lives, and I've kind of shared about my own, that our career path comes from happenstance, or we could call it providence, right?
Yes.
From our faith perspective,
There's
right?
There's no such thing as, it's a God incidence, not a coincidence, right? Everything's a God incidence.
Right. And what that theory says is to, like we're talking about, have experiences, meet people, try things, right? And from there, providential meetings come up with specific people, maybe for internships or jobs, right? For example, or that discernment of actually being concretely in a line of work, or at least observing it and seeing, oh, do I thrive here? Do I grow here? Or is this not a good fit for me? Right. And so, yes, absolutely. I think even in high school, even just what we call an informational interview, where you go to a job site, talk to somebody who has the job. What is it like? Pros, cons, watch them do their job if possible. That's one of the best ways to discern.
Go to work with mom day or go to work with dad day.
Yes, absolutely. And I even say from a practical standpoint, someone help people find a job is experience is extremely valuable for a future employer, right? And so that the employer could see you actually did something, right? And had experience. That's even from a practical standpoint, incredibly helpful.
And we've talked about having. I know one of the takeaways that you believe is so important for people in terms of this whole process is having those experiences, engaging with life. But another one of the points that I know you've thought is so important is being attentive to how God is speaking to you in these experiences.
Yes.
Okay. So that probably is more difficult because now you're not just listening, or you're not just having the experience and sorting out the pros and cons in your brain. You're listening to what the Lord might be telling you. It's a maybe more quiet type of process. How was God helping you discern, or how was it in prayer? Was it taking specific time to pray about these experiences?
Yeah, I think it was a combination of that, of prayer, listening to God in quiet time, bringing to him my challenges and struggles too. But I think along those lines too, I think God speaks to us also how he shapes our hearts in different moments, right? Where there's a certain grace in different experiences and maybe an ability to do something you didn't think you could do, right? And seeing how God's stepping in.
Wow.
And equipping you in those moments,
Sure.
right? So
it's because God was working through me that I was able to do this.
Right. So listening is certainly listening, like actually sitting in quiet prayer. But I think listening also comes from engaging with life and almost listening to how God speaks to you through those experiences, like almost in like a sacramental sense, right? Yeah.
That's very profound.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of again in my own experiences because I've already mentioned that I loved language. I loved English. I loved grammar, poetry. I loved how language worked, and I also loved teaching. And when I was a kid, sometimes in the classroom there were maybe 50 children and only one teacher, and so sometimes some of the other students could go around and help the students who were having trouble with the lesson, and I got to do that sometimes. And I loved helping other people learn. I loved teaching. So I had those kind of practical experiences in a sense, but the Lord in the last 20 years has had me involved full time with pregnancy help, and which is more like counseling, consulting, listening to people, helping them discern, and one-on-one, like you said, not with a classroom. I didn't think I could do that. I felt totally ill-equipped and not educated, I didn't have the credentials. I was a teacher. How could I do this? But when I stepped forward and tried it, because my husband and I started housing pregnant girls in our home, and that was one-on-one. That was listening. I wasn't teaching them A, B, C, D, E, and now you take it from there. I had to listen and help them discern, what was God saying to them? And I felt totally ill-equipped to do that. Ill-prepared, I should say. But then I saw that God was actually working through me, and that this was something that I could do because he was working through me.
You saw bearing fruit.
Yeah. And so, I mean, it just, I guess my own experience as I'm thinking through what you've said, I would really agree with 100%. Sometimes God wants you to do something that you don't feel you have the credentials for, you don't feel equipped. But when you take that first step and you see that God is working through you, then you know, okay, God is calling me to this, and he will equip me. I mean, often in pregnancy help work, we say God doesn't call the equipped, he equips the called. So when it is a calling, he will equip you along the way.
Yes. Yeah. And it's really the next step at a time, right? It's
sure.
like maybe for example, when I was in my internship, right, I was still in that setting, and so I was equipped for that moment, right? I wasn't equipped for 5 years from that moment.
Right. He keeps equipping you.
Right, exactly, as you go, right. And you bring up an interesting point. This is one that I thought about in my own discernment, is there was a point where I wasn't sure if I wanted to be a counselor because I knew there were certain challenges of being a counselor, right? And I'm certainly have encountered those in certain ways, and I was a little bit intimidated by those. And it was actually in a moment of prayer, kind of more quiet prayer time, where I was at this crossroads, and God sort of spoke to me in that moment, saying that, kind of convicted me, saying I was seeking after comfort. Like, I want a job where I can just be comfortable, right? And he said, thinking that's how I'll be happy. And he showed me that I would truly be happy if I was in a place where I would use what I've been given and be able to serve, right? And that's how I'll be happy, right? It's not going to be from running after comfort, right?
Yeah.
And I had so much clarity and peace in that moment. Still, those challenges were still before me, but I felt much more confident that it's worth it, right?
Sure.
Even if those challenges do manifest, right? It's worth it to pursue what God's called me to do if he has, and the fulfillment that comes from doing that.
Sure.
Yeah.
That idea of comfort or happiness, is not really, should not really be our goal. But following the path that God has for us.
Yeah.
And when we do that, we will have a sense of peace.
Right.
Yeah.
And a deeper happiness, not just sort of a comfort happiness. In that
Right.
sense, right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, I mean, your story is just beautiful. And I think the points that we've been making, discernment comes from having experiences and engaging with life and then being attentive to how God's speaking to you in these experiences and not directly making your goal what's going to make me comfortable or how am I feeling comfortable here, but rather knowing that you want to serve and that how you will find deep happiness through service. Service of your fellow man, service of your brothers and sisters, but mainly service of the Lord.
Yes.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, that's beautiful, and I'm sure that your counselees are tremendously blessed. Do you do a lot of counseling related to career counseling, or
Honestly, not as much. That is kind of its own thing. Once in a while it comes up though, and I think we can apply all these principles with discernment in general, or how to live life well in general, right?
Sure,
So, yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sure so many people listening are going to benefit from that. And I want to say we're going to have a second program with David Lach. Thank you so much for being with us, David, today and sharing your story. And we're going to have a second program on what the Lord has shown him in terms of helping individuals in their marriages. So certainly path in life in terms of career, in terms of job, what God, and then for those who have the marriage vocation, absolutely essential, the same process. So thank you so much, David, for being our guest today. And you've been listening to the Family Sanctuary on St. Gabriel Catholic Radio. I'm your host, Peggy Hartshorn. To find this program again and other programs from Family Sanctuary, go to stgabrielradio.com, choose podcasts, and then Family Sanctuary. We're broadcast at 4 o'clock on Saturdays and 2 o'clock on Sundays, right here on St. Gabriel Catholic Radio. So join us again to strengthen our families and make them sanctuaries of life as God intends.
Family Sanctuary is a production of listener-supported St. Gabriel Catholic Radio, AM 820. Archives of Family Sanctuary with Peggy Hartshorn are available at stgabrielradio.com.